Hello, it is Ryan, and we could all use an extra bright spot in our day, couldn't we? Just to make up for things like sitting in traffic, doing the dishes, counting your steps, all the mundane stuff. That is why I'm such a big fan of Chumba Casino. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere with daily bonuses. That should brighten your day a little. Actually, a lot. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com. That's ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to part 2 of this mini-series with original members of the Gay Liberation Front in honour of Pride Month this June. Here is Martha, Perry, Ron, Ellen, and Jason. What was interesting about what you mentioned, Jason, about what was happening over on the West Coast is that it's not lost on me that 1969 was the year where the Manson family were responsible for a string of murders that took place over in California in the year of 1969. And there was so much happening over on the West Coast with the Jesus movement in terms of destructive groups up and coming with the Children of God, with the Source family, with the Manson family, with the Process Church of the Final Judgment. So you talking about individuals that are sort of countering the work that you're attempting to do in your activism work is not surprising to me at all. It's unfortunate because if that would have swept faster across, gosh, I wonder where we'd be right now with everything that's already been accomplished. But in terms of the Jesus movement over on the West Coast, I wonder how if Stonewall would have, if the riot itself would have ever have been able to take place in somewhere like California, even though that was like kind of like the height of the counterculture movement.
Actually, it did. There were two. There was one in Los Angeles and one in San Francisco, gay riots, in the couple of years before Stonewall. The difference was that after the riots were over, nobody organized. The difference was that we organized. We formed the Gay Liberation Front. And the groups that came out of it, Gay Activist Alliance, STAR, and so on, everything that they did, good or bad or whatever, everything that we all accomplished that changed the face of America and the world, really, with regard to gay stuff, came out of organizing, not just because there was a riot.
But there were, in fact, organized groups on the West Coast, both in San Francisco and Los Angeles. But unlike what happened in New York, nobody, to use that phrase, seized the moment.
Right. No, nothing to fuel the fire.
Yeah.
But we also had, New York was the media center of America. And the media picked up on us amazingly fast. I mean, like, Time magazine had a piece on the Gay Liberation Front that mentioned that Carla Jay was the moderator. The Gay Liberation Front had a female moderator, thinking that Carla was. We used to have a monthly moderator, that Carla was going to be the moderator of the Gay Liberation Front. I mean, it got into Time magazine, got into certainly got into the Village Voice. At one point, the term Gay Liberation Front became generic for a gay liberation. And when 8 members of the Gay Activist Alliance chained themselves to a balcony when John Rachel Lindsay, the mayor of New York, was going to make a public appearance, and they were protesting that Lindsay had not done enough, certainly for a bill to protect LGBT people. Lindsay said, "Would the members of the Gay Liberation Front please be quiet?" And people from GAA countered, "We're not from the Gay Liberation Front. We're from the Gay Activist Alliance." But at this point, the term GLF had become generic for this movement.
Do you feel like New York being sort of the other end of the West Coast meant that it was less, I don't know what terms to use, so I really don't want to offend anyone, but less acceptable, less unacceptable for same-sex relationships or anything out of that binary expectation for humanity, because like in Haight-Ashbury there was more of that kind of presence, or more of that people kind of just doing their own thing in.
Well, I mean, I'll just say this. I lived in San Francisco when I was 18 years old. I hitchhiked from Savannah, Georgia to San Francisco because I'd been told that at the age of 17, I actually did that. I was told that San Francisco was, quote, crawling with queers. And at that point, and this was in 1965, at that point, the bars in San Francisco were not mafia. I mean, just the mafia totally controlled most gay bars, but San Francisco actually had something called the Tavern Guild, which put the ownership of gay bars in San Francisco into the hands of the actual owners of the gay bars, many of which were actually queer. And I could not get over the degree of acceptance and freedom I had in San Francisco as an 18-year-old kid. Then I moved to New York because there were no jobs in San Francisco. I was literally starving there. So I moved to New York where there were jobs. And at that point, the mafia controlled the bars. There was more homophobia than I could stand in the workplace, unless you happened to luck out and found a place, that would actually accept you. But the homophobia was just horrifying. There was huge violence against gay people. So, and also, you had a very, very strong Catholic Church in New York City. You had the famous Cardinal Francis Spellman, known to the gay community as Franny Spellman, who was the official cardinal of the armed forces. So you had all of these very conservative forces in New York City, despite the fact that everyone knew that there were certainly queer people involved in the theater, involved in fashion, but they kept a very low profile.
I think we make a geographical error when we use the term New York City. We're basically now talking about what was going on in Manhattan. There were 4 other boroughs which looked in some ways more like Des Moines than Iowa by the Hudson was very different than many of us experienced. Everybody's going to Brooklyn now and the outer boroughs. In 1969, you came to Manhattan to be quote unquote free.
Absolutely. It was also cheaper. It was possible to live there.
I was born and raised in Manhattan. I'm one of the 3.
Affordable to live there that's a really strange concept, isn't it?
Yeah, San Francisco was always the place where you could be free. It had always had a very liberal streak to it. It always had, I think, for a very long time, gay people, it's where the beatniks were, all of this stuff. So you have, there's 2,500, 2,700 miles between Manhattan and San Francisco. But these were like the 2 centers. And, I guess there's a similar thing happening in Great Britain. But basically, there are those cities that gay people flock to from Savannah, Georgia, from all over, because they couldn't be free these other places. And when people tried to stop that movement toward freedom, there was pushback in various ways that finally in New York City reached its head at the Stonewall. On June 28th, 1969. It had already, as Martha mentioned, at the Compton Cafeteria riot, which was mainly transvestites, whom we now call trans people. That had already happened. The Black Cat had already happened in New York. I think there was even a rebellion in Minneapolis that I read about that happened even before that is even less known. So things had sprung up somewhere, but somehow the time and place was right. And whether or not Martha thought in her head consciously, we have to take the energy of Stonewall and keep it going, I will be bold enough to say that's in fact what happened, because out of that march came the Gay Liberation Front, and all of a sudden, gay liberation fronts started springing up all over the country. I know one sprung up in London because I reviewed a book that was written about it, a not very good book at all, a dishy book. So it really caught on. And so Martha and Ellen and were in the right place at the right time. And they already had, I think, that consciousness of the movement and of the connections between different social activist things alive in them, and then it just blossomed.
Perhaps in particular in New York, we were swimming in the waters of all the political activism that was, and New York has a long history of, the anarchist movement and the socialist movement. So that I know, for example, that Jason had gone to the South to do political voter registration with the Black Civil Rights Movement, or that many of us were going to anti-Vietnam War demonstrations. And as someone indicated,
it is Ryan Seacrest here. There was a recent social media trend which consisted of flying on a plane with no music, no movies, no entertainment. But a better trend would be going to ChumbaCasino.com. It's like having a mini social casino in your pocket. Chumba Casino has over 100 online casino-style games, all absolutely free. It's the most fun you can have online and on a plane. So grab your free welcome bonus now at ChumbaCasino.com. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
We were always in the closet or hiding, and they were very male-dominated organizations. Yet that energy that all over, there was anti-war, there was the National Organization of Women, there was the farm workers movement, there was on the West Coast in particular, the hippie and youth and yippie movement. I think just fed into why GLF started in 1969 as opposed to 1965. That energy that all over the country was exploding with political activism and with the assassination of Dr. King and Robert Kennedy and the rioting, protests. Malcolm X, the rioting in the large cities from the Black population.
There was also the Vietnam War going on, and by 1969 it was going on full tilt, as they say. And as we wrote in Come Out, I remember that in Come Out, the Vietnam War just exposed all of the wounds in the country, all of the horrifying contradictions in the country, the racial contradictions, the class contradictions, all of that came out through the war. And I remember it might have been the last issue of Come Out, but I published this poem that I wrote called Be Glad for the War, in which I said that without the war, we would never have seen these truths coming out so nakedly. They would have been hidden, under mountains of Republican, quote, good taste and geniality and all the usual dreck. They would just been hidden, and they were no longer hidden.
In the spring of 1969, before the Stonewall riot, well, starting in September and going through June, I was working at Barnard College. I'd gotten a secretarial job there after having worked at Harlem Welfare Center during the time that Martin Luther King was killed. So I'd been seeing quite a bit. My boss at Barnard College was a lesbian, which I found out when I had to come out to her, knowing that she was going to hear me on a radio program speaking for the Daughters of Bilitis. And then she let me know that she was gay. So it turns out that Barnard was a hotbed of lesbians who were interested in women's education. And instead of getting fired and squished, I was encouraged in that situation.
Yes.
Also, I wanted to say something about the meeting where Ellen proposed the Eastern Regional Conference of Homophile Organizations, where Ellen proposed the Christopher Street March commemorating the Stonewall riot and our first march. At the same time, Gay Liberation Front people put forth a program, principles that we asked the conference to accept. And one of them was, the basic one was control over your own body, which meant the right to ingest the drugs of your choice, that is, without being thrown into prison for smoking a joint, the right to sleep with other consenting adults, women's reproductive rights. This met from a great deal of opposition from one guy who was violently misogynist, and the right to not to have your body drafted and sent over to Vietnam to kill people or be killed. And all of these, because of that one guy's furious rejection and the objections of women from Daughters of Bilitis, who it turns out one of them had had an illegal abortion. The conference accepted our proposals. And these were, a lot of that was intersectional too.
Ellen, you wanted to follow up?
Well, I wanted to say something about the how the Vietnam War and the anti-Vietnam War protests had an impact on how we acted and how we thought. We had endless conversations about holding the first all-women's dance because it happened right, it was scheduled to happen right at the time of Kent State. So we went back and forth about whether it would dishonor the memory of those young kids who were mowed down by the National Guard at Kent State. We went ahead with the dance, but had several articles come out basically talking about why we made that decision. And I wrote one called A Time to Dance, A Time to Mourn, which tried to pull together all of these strands. So we were very, very much in, I'm going to say, the mainstream of the alternate stream in how we thought about the world around us, GLF's place in it, the place of lesbians and gay men within these larger movements. Intersectionality again. I love that word.
Hello, it is Ryan, and we could all use an extra bright spot in our day, couldn't we? Just to make up for things like sitting in traffic, doing the dishes, counting your steps, all the mundane stuff. That is why I'm such a big fan of Chumba Casino. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere with daily bonuses. That should brighten your day a little. Actually, a lot. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com. That's ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
I would like to ask all of my sister and brother panelists, how many of us, and I guess because this isn't visual, I guess we should speak up. How many of us were involved actively in the civil rights movement? So Ellen was, okay. How many of us were involved in the anti-war movement actively? So actually 4 of us were involved directly in the was anyone else, because I was very active in SDS, and I ended up being an SDS campus traveler, and I helped a little bit with the wording of the famous SDS anti-draft resolution. How many of us were involved actively in the anti-war movement? before GLF. Okay, all of us, most of us, except for Perry. So we all came to GLF with all of that experience. And in fact, my experience as a man was that when I started the New Haven Gay Liberation Front in the spring of 1970, what I was doing was taking all of the isms and all of the slogans that I had learned from the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, the New Left movement, and I was just putting gay in them. And I was treating the gay liberation movement like it was just an extension of all of these. And I personally needed a major reset, which was most definitely provided by my 2 years in New York City and my time in the Gay Liberation Front. And it was a major shift of consciousness. And I think that that's what Martha is talking about, and Ellen's talking about, and Perry is talking about, that things came together. And out of this, it was like this almost this alchemical transformation. And then that energy went out in turn back to the anti-war movement, back to the women's movement, etc., to continue the transformation long beyond the existence of the quote unquote, the 3 years of the Gay Liberation Front. The seeds were planted.
Yes, that what Jason was talking about was very much a part of what I call the Gay Liberation Front mindset. And I'd like to talk about that for a couple of minutes. The mindset, I felt, had three different prongs to it. The first was, and I've made notes about this, the first was the search for a need to affirm authenticity, this idea of your real self. And at the core of this authenticity was your gay self, your gay or lesbian self. This was just a smack in the face to so many of our, let's say, less political sisters and brothers out there who wanted to believe that the queer part of themselves was like this icing on the cake. They could just slice it right off. Whereas in GLF, we felt that this was the most authentic core of ourselves, was this, what they now call queer part, this LGBT part. The gay identity was on the same par as a Black identity, Hispanic identity, a Jewish identity. The one thing where I think, certainly among the men, I don't know how it worked among the women, was the feeling that the woman's identity was higher than that. And we really, the men that I knew really looked up to the whole idea of women's consciousness, that they had a higher consciousness than men had. This valorization of queerness and also the women's consciousness, it really took a beating later on as the LGBT movement became more mainstream, more corporatized, and also when you had a right-wing swing among women, so you had women like Phyllis Schlafly coming out. I mean, that was really kind of a slap in the face to many of us. The second part of it was this idea of what I call no apologies. We wanted to make no apologies for our queer selves. One of the first things so many people did, and that I experienced coming out earlier, was the idea that being gay, you had to constantly apologize for yourself. You had to constantly efface yourself. And this thing you did sexually and emotionally was something that you did only in the dark, and it had nothing to do with your real life. I felt like the apologies came basically in four directions. One of them, the first direction, was therapy. As soon as you came out, you had to go into therapy. And so many of my friends who were queer, they told me that they wanted to go into therapy in order that they could become adjusted homosexuals. In other words, they could fit into mainstream life and still keep this hidden part of themselves, but they would become adjusted. We really just wiped that off the map in GLF. It was like our idea was you didn't have to be adjusted. What we wanted to do was basically consciousness raising, and we formed these wonderful groups called CR groups, which could be another whole program, but the wisdom that we had became a group wisdom within the CR group. The second direction was religion. The idea was that by serving God, he would forgive you for being queer. And you ended up, certainly in this country, with thousands of men and women who became hyper-religious. They were queer but hyper-religious. They were in, God knows how many convents and monasteries and Baptist churches and all the whole thing, deep in the closet until they couldn't take it any longer. The third direction was the military. And this was like, and I had a number of friends who were in the military at this point too. My first lover had been in the Navy, and I actually became an Air Force spouse for 3 years later on. So I got to experience the military and gaze in the military a great deal. But the whole idea was, in the military, you could obliterate your queer self and become a real man. It was like, just shaking down of all your genuine feelings. The military would replace those with military feelings. So this was part of the apology thing. And then the fourth was the whole family thing. That is, like, if you got so ingrained and deeper into your family, you could be forgiven for being gay. And the writer Edmund White has this wonderful expression, what he called good school citizens. These were the closeted gay men who ended up on the school boards and the PTA, in the Boy Scouts. It was like they could apologize for themselves by becoming, very, very acceptable. And what GLF said was, we are making no more apologies. We're simply, this is what we are. You don't have to apologize anymore. And for me personally, this was like planting a landmine inside my, bowels. I mean, it meant that I no longer had to apologize to my family. I no longer had to feel about myself that the person that I was needed apology. I could just simply be myself. It was tremendous. And the third prong of the mindset was confrontation. That once we became established with what we really were, then confronting the world became not only easier, but even necessary. And GLF was very confrontational. I mean, we confronted the movement, we confronted the world, and we often confronted ourselves. I mean, we were perfectly capable of confronting each other on our own sexism, our own internalized homophobia, our own racism. This became very difficult for a lot of people. I mean, there are people who spent time in GLF and they came out later and they said how much they hated it because they were shaken to the core by it, and they weren't ready for it. And myself, I mean, I certainly went through this myself. They weren't ready for it, or they felt that they had to become a different person within GLF that was not their whole self. So this is one of the, as Ellen has said, there were flies in the ointment there, or sand in it anyway. But this confrontation part, I think to a certain degree, it added to the seeds of the destruction of the organization. But on the other hand, at the beginning, it was so just, mind-blowing. It was that, you could go out and say to other people, what the fuck is your problem that you can't accept me?
I have a question actually for Ellen and Martha, but it just occurred to me before I ask it, that Casey, since basically this is fitting into your series of podcasts on cults, it's kind of like one of the things that Perry just articulated is the anti-cult. That is, instead of us all following the dictums of a leader, we were all busy finding our own voices. And in that, there is also the potential seed of destruction of the organization, because all those individual voices are all speaking and they're all going in different directions as we're following our own paths, and it could get pretty chaotic. I wanted to ask Martha and Ellen, because I'm really glad that Perry mentioned CR groups, consciousness raising groups, because for me, as I found the meetings increasingly difficult, it was the CR groups that were the most revelatory part of the Gay Liberation Front. And in the all-male one I was in, and then my question, in the all-male one I was in, like 1 week we'd come in and we talk about our mothers. Then we talk about our fathers. Then we talk about sports. And I would discover, oh my God, there were people who actually didn't play in right field. In fact, they were the star of their baseball team. And they were fags. They were totally gay. And I discovered people who had wonderful mothers whose personality did not at all follow Irving Bieber's book on homosexuality. When I came out, there were the 6 worst books on homosexuality. One of them was Irving Bieber's book. I have it in my closet over there, where it belongs, in the closet. Homosexuality, which I found in Amherst College in the bookstore when I was trying to figure out who I was. And there's a whole passage about a whole chapter on the homosexual's mother and the homosexual's father. And I start underlining them all and going, oh my God, my mother was just like that. Oh my God, my father was just like that. That's why I'm homosexual, which of course is totally ridiculous. And the consciousness raising group blew that apart for me.
Ryan Seacrest here. When you have a busy schedule, it's important to maximize your downtime. One of the best ways to do that is by going to ChumbaCasino.com. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino games like spin slots, bingo, and solitaire that you can play for free for a chance to redeem some serious prizes. So hop on to ChumbaCasino.com now and live the Chumba life. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Were women also in consciousness raising groups? Because, I was so much in the male thing. Did you have them as well?
We
Yes.
had them. We had them as well. I wanted to say something about, before I go on with that answer, that I've always said that the Gay Liberation Front gave new depth of meaning to anarchy, to the term anarchy in our meetings. They were chaotic as hell. Yes, we had consciousness raising groups, but something that, this is going to be a broad overstatement, but something that I think set aside the consciousness raising groups and the membership of the Gay Liberation Front from the Panthers, the Young Lords, other groups, is people in the group had sexual relationships with each other, were in partnerships, some that lasted, some that fell apart. And the ones that fell apart made it quite difficult to be in a consciousness raising group with somebody you had just done wrong to. Okay. The thing, I got a lot out of the consciousness raising groups, but the one that I was in followed. Did people read Prisoners of Liberation about the Chinese Revolution? Talks a lot about something called criticism, self-criticism. So we would have our meeting, our consciousness raising group, with whatever the topic was. And then for the last 20 minutes, at least towards the end, the talons came out and we had a tendency to rip each other apart.
Yeah.
Again, it was, GLF was a formative experience for me. 85% was extraordinarily positive, and I brought that into the political work I do now. 15%, I would like to forget.
Okay, I was in consciousness raising groups, and we didn't have that kind of nastiness of that criticism, self-criticism at the end. So my experience of those things was positive. Also, I think the consciousness raising groups were started by the women's movement. And when we were asked who was involved prior to GLF in civil rights and in the anti-war movement, some of us were also involved in the women's movement. I was one of those. I didn't get involved in the civil rights movement because when those freedom rides were going on in the South, I was too young. My parents wouldn't have let me go. So one other thing was on the matter of Irving Bieber's book, a little funny story to tell. When I was at Barnard College and before the Stonewall riot, I debated Irving Bieber and this other lunatic psychiatrist, Charles Socarides, on TV. I was representing the Daughters of Bilitis. And that was when I had to come out to my mother because I thought one of my aunts was going to see this thing on daytime TV and call my mother, and she better hear it from me first.
How did that debate go? I'm sorry, I must know how that debate went.
I just want to say what cojones that took, Martha. It's the only word I can say.
I was too young and stupid to know better.
I was on with Jack Nichols in the same sort of debate, which also led to my having to tell my parents, having to come out to my parents. But you remember, was it Socarides or Bieber who coined the expression close binding intimate mother? That's what made male homosexuals, was a close binding intimate mother.
I have to say that when I came out to my parents, my mother started crying and saying, "It was all my fault."
Yours too.
Well, that's okay. She was right.
My mother blamed my father and my sister. My father for not disciplining me enough, and my sister for not, who was a very popular, pretty girl, for not getting dates with boys for me.
She wasn't grooming you.
Right. But my father had died in 1963, so I didn't have to deal with him. But my mother, I mean, this is it, Ellen, are you Jewish?
Am I Jewish?
No.
Yes.
Am I?
Yes. Yes. Okay, so all of us are Jews. So which is another story in and of itself, because there's that whole history of socialism and stuff, and social activism as an oppressed minority. But when I came out, just like Ron Punit said, my mother went, "Oh, what did I do wrong?" So she turned my big come out, episode into about her. And there I was trying to rescue her. "Oh, Mom, you did nothing wrong. It's actually really wonderful to be gay." I mean, the whole thing was just preposterous. And, but then, that's what's true about so much of America now, and everything that's going on around the woke movement and drag queens and everything. It's just preposterous. And what I wish more political people would remember is what part theater played in some of the most successful protests, when you dressed up in costume and you just laughed at those people because they're so utterly ridiculous.
When I came out to my mother the day before this TV show aired, it took me I could barely get the words out. I was so tense. She was so tense. She thought I was going to tell her I'd flunked out of school. I had a terminal ailment. I blurted it out. She relaxed. I mean, it was so bizarre. It was like she almost melted into herself, and she said, "I've known since you were 6." And I said, why didn't you tell me? She said, "It was none of my business, and you'd find out on your own. Don't tell your father."
That's what my father said when I told him, "Don't tell your mother."
Yeah.
But I thought I was coming out to him, and he said, "So what?" And he said, "So what else is new?" I knew that already.
Yeah, your father, my mother should have dated.
Well, what's interesting is my father, okay, I was the gay one in my immediate family. My father's twin brother had 3 children, one of whom was a gay male, and his other 2 children each had gay children of their own. So it's definitely in our family on the father's side. And when my father's twin brother, who was Orthodox Jewish, his son was gay, and the older sister said, "Daddy, make him stop doing that," because my cousin was behaving in a quote faggoty way. And my Orthodox uncle said, "I can't do that. God made him that way."
That's a new twist on orthodoxy. Okay.
Yeah, I was just thinking that myself.
I was going to say that I didn't have the coming out experience like that. My father died when I was 11 years old, and he and I were extremely close. It was the opposite of the stereotype relationship, the gay stereotype of the father and son. But my mother was a lesbian, and so my sister and I kind of figured out that she was a lesbian way before our mother came out. She had these very, very secret relationships with women. And by the time I was out, by the time I was 17 years old, there was nothing to talk about anymore. I mean, I knew that she was a lesbian and she knew that I was gay. And we never had that moment of saying, I'm this and you're that. It just never happened.
That is the end of part 2 of this mini-series on the Gay Liberation Front, in honour of Pride Month. For early access to ad-free full-length episodes, you can find me on patreon.com/The Cult Vault, or you can get in touch with me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com and follow me on Twitter and Instagram at cultvaultpod. I'm your speaker, Casey, host of the Cult Vault podcast.
Hello, it is Ryan, and I was on a flight the other day playing one of my favorite social spin slot games on ChumbaCasino.com. I looked over at the person sitting next to me, and you know what they were doing? They were also playing Chumba Casino. Coincidence? I think not. Everybody's loving having fun with it. Chumba Casino is home to hundreds of casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere, even at 30,000 feet. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com to claim your free welcome bonus. That's ChumbaCasino.com and live the Chumba life.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.